Marcus had just finished complaining about the coffee when his heart stopped. He was sitting at our kitchen table, the same wooden table we'd shared breakfast at for 23 years, stirring his cup and shaking his head at me with that familiar grin. "Sarah, this instant coffee tastes like cardboard mixed with regret," he said, tapping his spoon against the rim. "If this stuff kills me, you'll know exactly what to put on my tombstone." He laughed at his own joke, the way he always did, and I rolled my eyes while buttering my toast. Then his hand froze mid-stir. The spoon clattered to the table. His eyes went wide, not with surprise but with something else. Recognition, maybe, like he suddenly understood a puzzle he'd been working on his whole life. I dropped my knife and reached for him, but he was already gone. Just like that. No dramatic collapse. No final words of love. 1 second he was making jokes about coffee, the next he was slumped forward, and the silence in our kitchen became the loudest thing I'd ever heard. I called 911, though I already knew it was too late. The operator walked me through chest compressions while I knelt on our tile floor, pressing on Marcus's chest and whispering his name like it might bring him back. When the paramedics arrived, they confirmed what I already felt in my bones. Massive heart attack, nothing anyone could have done. After they took him away, I sat on our couch staring at his empty coffee cup, still sitting there on the table like he might come back to finish it. That's when I remembered I had to call David. Our son. The call I'd been dreading since the moment Marcus collapsed. David lived 2 states away with his wife Jennifer and their 8-year-old daughter Emma. We didn't talk often anymore. Maybe once a month, usually when they needed something or when Marcus pushed me to check in. The distance wasn't just geographic. David had grown into someone I barely recognized, someone who always seemed too busy for family but never too busy to ask for help with bills. I dialed his number with shaking hands. It rang 4 times before he picked up, and I could hear laughter and music in the background. "Mom. What's up?" His voice was distracted, like he was doing 3 other things while talking to me. "David, it's your father." I took a breath, steadying myself. "He had a heart attack this morning. He's gone." Silence. Then, "Oh. Wow. When did this happen?" "About an hour ago." He was sitting right here at breakfast and, "Mom, I'm really sorry, but today's Jennifer's birthday. We've got her whole family here, and she's been planning this party for weeks. Can I call you back tomorrow? We'll figure out all the details then." I stared at the phone, certain I'd misheard him. "David, your father just died." I know, and I'm really sorry. But there's nothing we can do right now, right? I mean, he's already. And Jennifer's been looking forward to this day. Her parents flew in from Oregon. I promise I'll call you first thing tomorrow morning and we'll talk about everything." I hung up without saying goodbye. I couldn't trust my voice not to break. Couldn't trust myself not to say something I'd regret forever. I sat there holding the phone, listening to the dial tone, wondering if I'd somehow raised a stranger. The next few days passed in a blur of arrangements and paperwork. The funeral home, the flowers, the obituary. Marcus had been well loved in our small town. He'd coached Little League for 15 years and volunteered at the food bank every Thanksgiving. People kept stopping by the house with casseroles and memories, sharing stories about how Marcus had helped them move or fix their car or just been there when they needed a friend. I kept expecting David to call, kept thinking he'd realize what he'd said and drive down immediately. But the calls that came were from everyone except him. His college roommate flew in from Denver. Marcus's brother drove 12 hours from Montana. Even the mailman, who'd known Marcus for a decade, asked if there was anything he could do. The morning of the funeral, I called David one more time to confirm the service details. Jennifer answered. "Oh, hi Sarah. David's in the shower, but he wanted me to tell you that he's still trying to decide if he can make it. We already booked this weekend getaway for my birthday, and the cancellation fees are pretty steep this close to the date. Plus, Emma has that soccer tournament on Saturday, and David doesn't want to disappoint her." I listened to her ramble about logistics and birthday plans and soccer schedules, while my husband's funeral was 3 hours away. When she finally paused, I said quietly, "It's his father's funeral, Jennifer." "I know, and we both feel terrible about the timing. But Marcus wouldn't want us to go into debt over cancellation fees, right? David says his dad was always practical about money. I hung up and finished getting dressed in the black dress Marcus had always said made me look elegant. I drove to the church alone, walked down that center aisle alone, and stood beside the casket receiving condolences from everyone except the one person who should have been there. People noticed. Of course they noticed. Marcus's friend Tom kept glancing toward the back of the church like David might still walk in. The pastor had to adjust his remarks because he'd planned to mention David's memories of his father. After the service, people approached me carefully, asking gentle questions about whether David had missed his flight or if there was some emergency keeping him away. I smiled and thanked them for coming and pretended my heart wasn't cracking a little more with each sympathetic look. But it was Marcus's old supervisor, Frank, who said something that stopped me cold. I have to admit, Sarah, I'm surprised David isn't here. Marcus mentioned a few months ago that he'd been helping David out financially, seemed a little stressed about it. I figured something that important would bring him home. I nodded and made some excuse about complicated travel, but Frank's words echoed in my head all afternoon. Marcus helping David financially. We'd always shared everything, every bill, every decision, every worry. If Marcus had been sending money to David, why hadn't he told me? That evening, after the last casserole-bearing neighbor had left, I sat in Marcus's recliner and tried to make sense of everything. The empty house felt enormous around me, full of echoes and shadows and questions I couldn't answer. I kept thinking about that phone call, about David's casual dismissal, about Jennifer's birthday party happening while we buried Marcus. But mostly, I kept thinking about Frank's comment. Marcus had been stressed about helping David financially. Money problems Marcus hadn't shared with me. My husband, who told me everything, who couldn't keep Christmas presents secret for more than a week, had been carrying some burden alone. I walked over to Marcus's desk in the corner of the living room, the old roll top he'd inherited from his father. He kept it locked, but I knew where he hid the key, taped under the bottom drawer, a hiding spot he'd shown me years ago with a wink and a joke about keeping his love letters safe. Inside were the usual things: tax returns, insurance papers, warranties for appliances we'd bought years ago. But in the back, I found a thin folder labeled simply David in Marcus's careful handwriting. My hands trembled as I opened it, and what I found inside made the room spin around me. Bank statements showing regular transfers to David's account. 500 here, 800 there, sometimes more. The amounts had been increasing over the past year, and the most recent transfer, dated just 2 weeks before Marcus died, was for $3,000 with a note: emergency, Jennifer medical bills. At the bottom of the folder was a letter in Marcus's handwriting, dated 3 days before his heart attack. It was addressed to David but never sent. Son, it read, this is the 3rd time you've told your mother one story and me another about why you need money. I've kept quiet because I hoped you were being honest, but I can't keep covering for you. If I find out you've lied about Jennifer's medical expenses, or if you ask for money again without being truthful about what it's really for, I won't be able to help you anymore. I love you, but I won't let you take advantage of your mother's trust. I read it twice, then a 3rd time, my hands shaking harder with each word. Marcus had known. He'd known David was lying to us, manipulating us, and he'd been trying to handle it alone. He'd been protecting me from the truth about our son right up until the day he died. I thought about that phone call again, about David's easy dismissal of his father's death, about how quickly he'd prioritized Jennifer's birthday over Marcus's funeral. It all made a horrible kind of sense now. David hadn't just become distant. He'd become someone who saw his parents as a source of money rather than people who loved him. I folded the letter carefully and put it back in the folder. Then I locked the desk and replaced the key exactly where Marcus had kept it. But I couldn't stop thinking about what I'd found, couldn't stop seeing David's behavior in this new, harsh light. 3 days later, David finally showed up at my door. He looked uncomfortable, shifting his weight from foot to foot like a teenager who'd missed curfew. Jennifer waited in their car, engine running, like she was ready to make a quick escape if things got awkward. "Mom," he said, stepping inside. "I know I should have come sooner." Jennifer thinks I handled everything wrong, and she's probably right. I offered him coffee, the same automatic gesture I'd made 1,000 times before, but everything felt different now. We sat in the living room, Marcus's empty chair between us like a silent witness to all the things my husband had known but never told me. "I'm sorry about the funeral," David continued, not quite meeting my eyes. "The timing was just impossible. You know how Jennifer gets about her birthday, and with her family flying in." I watched him make excuses, watched him try to justify missing his father's funeral for a birthday party, and all I could think about was that folder locked in Marcus's desk. The money. The lies. The letter Marcus had written but never sent because his heart stopped before he could find the courage to confront his son. "David," I said quietly, "did you know your father tried to call you the night before he died?" Something flickered across his face. Guilt, maybe, or just annoyance at being caught in another small betrayal. My phone was on silent. We were out to dinner for Jennifer's birthday week celebrations. I meant to call him back, but I figured it wasn't urgent. He never said anything about feeling sick. The room felt smaller suddenly, like the walls were closing in around us. I looked at my son, this man I'd raised, whose scraped knees I'd bandaged, whose homework I'd helped with, whose college graduation had made Marcus cry with pride, and realized I was looking at a stranger. "He wasn't sick, David. He had a heart attack. But he tried to reach you, and you didn't answer." David shifted uncomfortably. "Mom, I can't be available every second. I have my own life, my own family to think about." And there it was. The truth Marcus had been trying to protect me from. David didn't see us as family anymore. We were obligations, inconveniences, sources of financial help when needed, but otherwise just voices on the phone interrupting his real life. I walked him to the door without another word. He hugged me awkwardly and promised to call more often, promises we both knew he wouldn't keep. I watched him get in the car with Jennifer, watched them drive away without looking back, and I understood finally why Marcus had died with that letter unsent in his desk drawer. Some truths are too hard to speak, even when speaking them might save everyone involved. The silence in the house after David left felt different than the silence after Marcus died. When Marcus passed, the quiet was heavy with grief and shock. Now it felt sharp, like broken glass scattered across everything I thought I knew about my family. I couldn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that folder in Marcus's desk, those bank statements with their neat columns of numbers that told a story I'd never been allowed to read. $3,000 for Jennifer's medical bills. What medical bills? Jennifer had looked perfectly healthy sitting in that car, scrolling through her phone while David made his half-hearted apologies. At 2 in the morning, I gave up on sleep and went downstairs. I made tea and sat at the kitchen table where Marcus had died just a week ago, staring at his coffee cup that I still hadn't washed. Everything felt suspended, like I was living in the pause between one life ending and another beginning, but I didn't know what came next. The next morning, I called Dr. Patterson, Jennifer's physician. I'd met him at a few family gatherings, and Jennifer had mentioned him when she supposedly needed that $3,000 for medical expenses. "Oh, hello, Sarah. I'm so sorry for your loss. Marcus was a good man." His voice was warm, genuine. "What can I do for you?" I felt awkward asking, but I needed to know. "I'm trying to get our finances in order, and there's a large medical bill I can't track down. $3,000 that Marcus paid for Jennifer's treatment a few weeks ago." The pause lasted too long. "Sarah, I haven't treated Jennifer in over 2 years. Not since her routine physical. She's been perfectly healthy as far as I know." I thanked him and hung up, my hands shaking. So there were no medical bills. No emergency. Just another lie David had told to get money from his father. Another manipulation Marcus had discovered and tried to handle alone. I spent the rest of the morning going through Marcus's papers more carefully. Hidden in different folders, tucked between insurance documents and warranty papers, I found evidence of a pattern that stretched back almost 2 years. Small amounts at first, $200 for car repairs, $500 for Emma's school fees. But the requests had grown larger and more frequent, always with elaborate explanations that I now realized were probably lies. The worst part was finding Marcus's notes. Little scraps of paper where he'd written down the stories David told him, trying to keep track of which version of events was supposed to be true. David says Jennifer's mother sick, needs $800 for travel, was written on one piece of paper, with a question mark and the date. On another, check with Sarah about Jay's job situation. D says she was laid off but S mentioned promotion. Marcus had been trying to protect me from knowing how badly David was lying to us, but he'd also been trying to figure out what was real and what wasn't. Reading those notes felt like watching my husband slowly realize that our son had become someone neither of us recognized. I was still sitting there surrounded by papers when the doorbell rang. It was Emma, my granddaughter, standing on the porch with her backpack and a shy smile. "Grandma Sarah? Mom dropped me off for my piano lesson, but Mrs. Martinez isn't home. Can I wait here?" Emma had been taking piano lessons with our neighbor for 2 years, every Thursday after school. But Mrs. Martinez had been out of town all week helping her daughter with a new baby. Jennifer knew this. I'd mentioned it when she called to ask about the lesson schedule. "Of course, sweetheart. Come in." I hugged her, breathing in the familiar scent of her strawberry shampoo. "But Mrs. Martinez is still in California. Didn't your mom know?" Emma's face fell. She said she forgot, but she seemed happy about it. She told Dad she needed a few hours to think. She looked around the living room, taking in the flowers people had sent, the sympathy cards on the mantel. "I'm sorry about Grandpa Marcus. I wanted to come to the funeral, but Mom said it would be too sad for kids." I felt that familiar anger rising in my chest, but I pushed it down. Emma didn't need to carry the weight of her parents' failures. "Would you like to see some pictures of your grandpa?" I was just looking through old photo albums. We spent the afternoon on the couch, Emma curled up next to me while I showed her photos of Marcus coaching her father's little league team, building the treehouse in our backyard, teaching David to drive in the empty parking lot behind the grocery store. Emma asked questions about everything. What Marcus was like when David was little, what their house was like, whether David had been good at baseball. "Dad doesn't talk about when he was a kid very much," she said, studying a photo of Marcus and 10-year-old David building a Pinewood derby car. "He says the past is the past." "Your grandpa loved your dad so much," I told her, and it was true. Even with everything I discovered, even knowing about the lies and the money, I knew Marcus had loved David completely. That's what made it all so much worse. Emma stayed for dinner. Jennifer didn't call to check on her, didn't seem worried about where her 8-year-old daughter was as the sun set and homework time approached. Finally, at 8 o'clock, David showed up looking annoyed. "Emma, why didn't you call when Mrs. Martinez wasn't there?" "We've been worried sick." It was such an obvious lie. He'd been 2 miles away at home, and his phone had been working fine when I'd called to let them know Emma was with me. But Emma just apologized and gathered her things, already trained to smooth over her parents' inconsistencies. After they left, I sat in Marcus's chair and thought about everything I'd learned in just 2 days of looking. The lies about money. The lies about medical bills. The lies about being worried about Emma. The way David had missed his father's funeral but showed up annoyed when his free babysitting arrangement got complicated. Yahan tak. I thought about Marcus trying to handle all of this alone, trying to protect me while also trying to figure out how to help David without enabling him. I thought about that unsent letter, about the words Marcus had written but never found the courage to speak. But I also thought about Emma, asking innocent questions about her grandfather while her parents used her piano lesson as an excuse to dump her somewhere convenient. Emma, who wanted to come to the funeral but was told she was too young for grief. Emma, who was already learning to apologize for her parents' failures. The next morning, I called my lawyer. Richard Clemens had handled our wills and estate planning for 15 years. He was a kind man with grown children of his own, and he'd always treated Marcus and me like family rather than just clients. When I called and asked for an appointment, he fit me in that same afternoon. "Sarah, I'm so sorry about Marcus. I know this must be incredibly difficult." He gestured to the chair across from his desk, The same one where Marcus and I had sat 3 years ago updating our wills. What can I help you with? I'd brought everything, the bank statements, the transfer records, Marcus's notes, the unsent letter. I spread it all out on Richard's desk like evidence in a trial, which I suppose it was. I need to change my will, I said. Everything. All of it. Richard listened while I explained what I'd found, reading through the documents with the careful attention of someone who'd seen family betrayal before. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair and studied me carefully. Sarah, I have to ask, are you sure about this? Grief can make us want to act quickly, and these kinds of changes are hard to undo. I've never been more sure of anything in my life. I pointed to Marcus's unsent letter. My husband died trying to figure out how to protect me from knowing what David had become. But I know now, and I won't let it continue. We spent the next 2 hours restructuring everything. The house, the life insurance, Marcus's retirement accounts, my own savings. All of it would go into a trust for Emma, accessible when she turned 25. David and Jennifer would receive nothing. If they tried to contest the will, Emma would gain full control immediately, and they would forfeit any future claim. What about David's reaction? Richard asked as we finalized the documents. This is going to come as a shock. I thought about David's voice on the phone when I told him his father was dead. Distracted. Inconvenienced. Already planning his exit from the conversation. Let him be shocked, I said. Maybe it's time he learned that actions have consequences. But I wasn't done. I had one more request for Richard, something that had occurred to me while watching Emma study those old photographs. I want to write a letter to Emma, to be opened on her 18th birthday. Something that explains all of this, tells her the truth about what happened. I looked at the papers scattered across Richard's desk. She deserves to know who her grandfather really was, and she deserves to understand why these decisions were made. Richard nodded. That's wise. Sometimes the truth takes time to be safe. I spent that evening writing the letter, 6 pages of careful honesty about Marcus, about David, about the choices that had led us to this point. I told Emma about her grandfather's kindness, his generosity, and how that generosity had been taken advantage of. I told her about the lies and the money, but I also told her about love, how much Marcus had loved David despite everything, how much I loved her, how much I hoped she would learn from our family's mistakes. When I sealed the letter, I felt something shift inside me. Not relief exactly, but a sense of completion. Marcus had died carrying secrets he couldn't bear to share. I wouldn't make the same mistake. The legal documents were filed within a week. Richard's office sent copies to David by certified mail, the kind that required a signature and left a paper trail. I imagined David signing for the envelope, probably assuming it was some routine paperwork related to Marcus's death, maybe even hoping it was notification of an inheritance. I was sitting in the garden when my phone rang 3 days later. David's name appeared on the screen, and for a moment I considered not answering. But I'd made my choice. I'd drawn my line. Now I had to stand behind it. Mom, what the hell is this? His voice was sharp, angry, all pretense of grief or respect gone. This thing. It's not real, right? Some kind of mistake. It's real, David. You can't just cut me out of everything. I'm your son. That money, the house. Half of that should be mine. I walked over to Marcus's rose bushes, the ones he'd planted when David was born. They were blooming despite his death, red flowers bright against the green leaves. Tell me about Jennifer's medical bills, I said quietly. Silence. Then, what? The $3,000 your father sent you 2 weeks before he died. For Jennifer's medical emergency. Tell me about that. The pause stretched long enough that I wondered if he'd hung up. Finally, look, we needed the money, okay? Things have been tight, and Dad always helped when we asked. So there were no medical bills. Mom, you don't understand the financial pressure we're under. The mortgage, Emma's school, Jennifer's car payment. So you lied to your father to get money, And you let him die thinking there was some emergency that required $3,000. It wasn't like that. His voice was defensive now, scrambling. We were going to pay him back. We just needed some time to get on our feet. I looked at the house Marcus had worked overtime to pay off, at the garden he'd tended every weekend, at the neighborhood where he'd been known and respected for his honesty and generosity. Your father tried to call you the night before he died, I said. Did you know that? Mom, please. I've apologized for that already. We were out, I didn't hear the phone. And you missed his funeral for a birthday party. That wasn't just a party, it was Jennifer's family, they'd traveled. And now you're upset about money. I sat down on the bench Marcus had built under our old oak tree. Not that your father is gone. Not that you never got to say goodbye. Not that you missed your chance to apologize for lying to him. You're upset about money. I'm upset because you're being vindictive. Dad would hate this. He'd want his family taken care of. Your father spent the last months of his life trying to figure out how to love you without enabling you. He wrote you a letter about it, David. He knew you were lying, and he was trying to find the courage to stop giving you money. Another long silence. When David spoke again, his voice was smaller, uncertain. He wrote me a letter. He never sent it. He died before he could decide what to do. I stood up, brushing dirt from my hands. But I'm not him, David. I don't have 23 years of watching you grow up to cloud my judgment. I just have the evidence of who you've become. Mom, please. We can work this out. I know I've made mistakes, but cutting me off completely. Goodbye, David. I hung up and turned off my phone. Then I went inside and made myself a cup of tea, using the good china Marcus and I had saved for special occasions. If this wasn't a special occasion, the day I finally stopped enabling my son's lies, then nothing was. The silence after hanging up on David felt like stepping into clean air after years of breathing smoke. I sat at the kitchen table with my tea, watching the steam rise from the cup, and waited for the guilt to hit me. It never came. Instead, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months. Peace. That peace lasted exactly 2 days. Jennifer called first, her voice syrupy sweet in that way that meant she was furious but trying to hide it. Sarah, I think there's been some terrible misunderstanding about Marcus's will. David is just devastated, and honestly, we're all worried about you. Grief can make people do things they don't really mean. I let her talk, listening to her carefully constructed concern while I folded Marcus's laundry. His shirts still smelled like his cologne, and I wasn't ready to give them away yet. The thing is, Jennifer continued, we've been talking to some people, and apparently there are ways to challenge these kinds of decisions when someone isn't thinking clearly. Not that we want to do that, of course. We just think maybe you should talk to someone. A counselor, maybe, or even a doctor. Just to make sure everything's okay upstairs, you know. There it was. The threat wrapped in false concern. Jennifer was suggesting I was mentally incompetent, setting the groundwork to have my will overturned. I stopped folding Marcus's blue work shirt and listened more carefully. I mean, it's not normal to cut off your only child, especially when he's grieving too. And think about Emma, she's going to grow up knowing her grandmother chose money over family. Is that really the legacy you want to leave? Jennifer, I said calmly, how much money did David tell you he'd inherited? The question caught her off guard. Well, we assumed. I mean, the house alone is worth. He told you he was inheriting everything, didn't he? That's why you're so upset. You'd already spent the money in your mind. That's not. We're concerned about family, Sarah. About keeping everyone together during this difficult time. I finished folding Marcus's shirt and added it to the pile. Emma is still my granddaughter. This doesn't change that. But David made his choices, and now he has to live with the consequences. But Sarah. I hung up. Within an hour, David was at my door, and this time he hadn't left Jennifer in the car. She stood behind him on the porch, arms crossed, her expression no longer bothering with fake sweetness. "Mom, we need to talk," David said, pushing past me into the house. "This whole thing has gotten out of hand." Jennifer followed, her heels clicking on Marcus's hardwood floors like small hammers. She looked around the living room with calculating eyes, probably pricing the furniture, estimating what everything was worth. "David's right," she said, settling onto the couch without being invited. "We need to discuss this like adults. Emma's upstairs playing. I hope you don't mind, but we brought her because this conversation might take a while." I heard small footsteps overhead, Emma exploring the house she'd visited so rarely. At least she was here, I thought. At least she was somewhere safe while her parents showed their true colors. "The will is insane, Mom," David said, pacing in front of Marcus's bookshelf. "You can't seriously plan to leave everything to an 8-year-old. What if something happens to her? What if she grows up to be irresponsible with money? At least if you leave it to me, there's some adult oversight. Like the adult oversight you showed with the $3,000 you lied to get from your father?" Jennifer's mask slipped completely. "Oh, please. Every family helps each other out financially. That's what parents do." Marcus understood that. Marcus understood that David was lying to him. That's why he was planning to cut him off. "You don't know that," David said quickly. "That letter doesn't prove anything. Dad was just frustrated about money stuff. He would have gotten over it." I walked to Marcus's desk and pulled out the folder, the one I'd been carrying around like evidence since the day after the funeral. I set it on the coffee table between us and watched their faces change as they recognized what it was. "Your father documented everything, David. Every lie you told, every story that didn't add up. He was trying to figure out how to help you without being an enabler." I opened the folder and pulled out the bank statements. 18 months of transfers. Almost $15,000 total. And in the end, he realized you were never planning to pay any of it back. Jennifer leaned forward, studying the papers. "These are private financial records. You had no right to go through Marcus's personal things. Marcus was my husband. These are my financial records too. Money that came out of our joint accounts to support lies my son told." I looked at David, who was staring at the floor. "Did you ever plan to pay any of it back?" "We were going to. Did you ever plan to pay it back?" David's shoulders sagged. "Things were tight, Mom. You don't understand the pressure we're under. The economy, Jennifer's job situation, Emma's school costs. Emma goes to public school. Good public schools aren't free. There are fees, supplies, activities." "Stop." I held up my hand. "Just stop lying. I'm tired of listening to you lie." Jennifer stood up, her face flushed with anger. "You know what? Fine. You want to play hardball? We can play hardball too. We've talked to a lawyer, Sarah. A good one. And he says that disinheriting your only child, especially right after a traumatic loss, shows clear signs of diminished capacity." She pulled out her phone and started scrolling through something. "We've been documenting everything. Your erratic behavior since Marcus died, your social isolation, the way you've been obsessing over old paperwork. We have witnesses who'll testify that you haven't been yourself." "What witnesses?" "People from the funeral. They'll say you seemed confused, disoriented. And your neighbor mentioned that you've been talking to yourself in the garden, having conversations with Marcus like he's still alive." I had been talking to Marcus in the garden, the way people do when they're grieving, when they need to feel connected to someone they've lost. But I could see how Jennifer would twist that into evidence of mental decline. "And then there's your paranoid obsession with these financial records," Jennifer continued, gesturing at the folder. "Normal people don't dig through their dead husband's papers looking for conspiracy theories. Normal people grieve and move on." David looked uncomfortable with Jennifer's attack, but he didn't stop her. That told me everything I needed to know about who was really driving this confrontation. "So here's what's going to happen," Jennifer said, putting her phone away. You're going to call your lawyer and fix this will situation. You're going to leave David what he deserves as your son. And in return, we won't have to pursue any legal action regarding your mental state. The threat hung in the air like smoke. They were trying to blackmail me into changing my will by threatening to have me declared incompetent. I looked at David, waiting for him to object, to defend me, to show some trace of the boy Marcus had raised with such love and pride. He said nothing. "Get out of my house," I said quietly. "Sarah," Jennifer started. "Get out of my house. Both of you. Now." "Mom, let's just," David began. "Get out." They left, but not before Jennifer made a show of calling upstairs for Emma in a voice loud enough for the neighbors to hear. "Emma, honey, we have to go. Grandma Sarah isn't feeling well today." I watched from the window as they drove away, Jennifer talking rapidly while David stared straight ahead. Emma was in the back seat, looking back at the house with worry in her eyes. That night, I couldn't sleep again. I kept thinking about Jennifer's threats, about witnesses who would testify that I seemed confused at my husband's funeral, about neighbors who might say I was talking to myself in the garden, about lawyers who specialized in challenging wills and exploiting grieving widows. But I also thought about Marcus, about the life we'd built together, about the values we tried to instill in David, about the difference between being generous and being foolish, between loving someone and enabling their worst impulses. At 3 a.m, I got up and called Richard's emergency line. "Sarah, what's wrong?" "They're going to challenge the will. Jennifer says they have witnesses, documentation of my mental state. They want me declared incompetent." Richard was quiet for a moment. "Are you competent, Sarah?" "Yes." "Then we'll prove it. Can you come in tomorrow morning? I want to arrange for you to be evaluated by a psychiatrist, someone who can testify to your mental state if necessary. We'll build our own documentation." "Richard, there's something else. Something I haven't told you yet." I told him about Emma, about how she'd been dropped off for a piano lesson that everyone knew was cancelled, about how her parents seemed to use her as an excuse or a prop depending on what they needed. I told him about the conversations I'd overheard, about Jennifer's casual threats to homeschool Emma if she didn't cooperate with their plans. "I'm worried about her," I said. "Not just the money. I'm worried about Emma herself." "What do you want to do?" I looked out the window at Marcus's garden, at the roses blooming in the moonlight. "I want to protect her. Whatever it takes." The next morning, I drove to Richard's office with a box full of new evidence. Not just Marcus's financial records this time, but everything I'd been collecting since the funeral. Jennifer's threatening text messages. David's voicemails alternating between guilt trips and demands. Even a printed copy of Jennifer's Instagram post from the day of Marcus's funeral. A photo of her birthday brunch with the caption, "Living my best life." But the most important thing in the box was something I'd found that morning while Emma was at school. A small recording device, the kind teenagers use to record school lectures, tucked behind a picture frame in the guest room where Emma sometimes played when she visited. I'd found it by accident while dusting, and when I checked it, I discovered hours of audio from the previous weeks. Emma had been recording her parents' conversations, capturing their arguments about money, their discussions about challenging my will, even their strategies for using her as leverage against me. Richard listened to the recordings with a grim expression. In one, Jennifer talked about coaching Emma to say she was afraid of me, to tell social workers that I'd been acting strangely. In another, David discussed ways to isolate me from friends and neighbors, to make me seem paranoid and unstable. "This changes everything," Richard said when the recordings ended. "These aren't just greedy relatives trying to contest a will. They're planning to manipulate a child as part of their scheme." "What can we do?" "We document everything. We file reports with Child Services about Emma's welfare. We make sure that if they try to challenge your mental state, the court sees exactly what kind of people they are." Richard paused the recording device. "Sarah, are you prepared for this to get ugly? Because they're going to fight dirty." I thought about Marcus, about the letter he'd written but never sent, about all the confrontations he'd avoided to keep peace in the family. I thought about Emma, 8 years old and already learning to protect herself by secretly recording her parents' schemes. They already made it ugly, I said. I'm just going to finish it. Over the next 2 weeks, Richard and I built our case like we were preparing for war. Medical evaluations proved my mental competency. Financial experts documented David's pattern of deception. Child welfare advocates reviewed the recordings Emma had made. But the most powerful evidence came from Emma herself. She showed up at my door on a Saturday morning, carrying a small backpack and looking determined in the way only children can when they've made an important decision. "Grandma Sarah, I need to tell you something important." I let her in, made her hot chocolate, and listened as she explained how she'd been recording her parents because she was scared of what they were planning. How she'd heard them talking about taking me to court, about making her lie to social workers, about using Marcus's death as an opportunity to get money. "I don't want them to hurt you," she said, her small hands wrapped around the warm mug. "Grandpa Marcus loved you so much. He wouldn't want them to be mean to you. What do you want to happen, Emma? If you could choose, how would you want things to work out?" She thought about this seriously, the way children do when adults actually ask their opinion about important things. "I want to live with you," she said finally. "Mom and Dad fight all the time about money, and they use me to get things they want. But you just love me. Like Grandpa Marcus did." I called Richard that afternoon. By Monday morning, we had filed for emergency custody of Emma, using her recordings as evidence of emotional manipulation and her own testimony about wanting to live with me. David and Jennifer's lawyer tried to paint me as a vindictive old woman stealing a child to spite her parents. But Emma's recordings told a different story. So did the financial records. So did the testimony of neighbors who'd watched David and Jennifer treat me like an ATM while barely spending time with their daughter. The custody hearing was scheduled for the following month, but Emma didn't wait for the court's decision. She made her own choice, the way Marcus would have been proud to see. She chose truth over convenience, love over manipulation, and family over money. And for the first time since Marcus died, I felt like our family might actually survive. The custody hearing was scheduled for a Tuesday morning in late October, 3 months after Marcus died. I woke up before dawn, not from anxiety but from a strange sense of anticipation. Today would either vindicate everything I'd fought for or destroy it completely. Emma had been living with me for 2 weeks by then, ever since the emergency placement. She'd settled into Marcus's old study, turning it into a combination bedroom and art studio. Her drawings covered the walls, pictures of flowers from the garden, sketches of Marcus from old photographs, and one detailed drawing of our house with all 3 of us standing in front of it, holding hands. "Are you nervous, Grandma?" she asked over breakfast, stirring her cereal in careful circles. "A little," I admitted. "Are you?" She nodded solemnly. "But Mom says nervous means you care about something important. And this is important." "Yes, it is." At the courthouse, I saw David and Jennifer for the first time since their ugly confrontation at my house. David looked terrible, thin, hollow-eyed, like he hadn't been sleeping. Jennifer looked pristine as always, but there was something brittle around her edges, like glass under pressure. Their lawyer, a sharp-faced woman named Ms. Henderson, had built their case around the idea that I was an unstable elderly woman using my wealth to steal their child. She painted Emma's desire to live with me as the result of manipulation and bribery, suggesting I'd turned an innocent girl against her loving parents during their time of grief. "Mrs. Collins has admitted to giving her granddaughter expensive gifts," Ms. Henderson told the judge. "Art supplies, a new bicycle, even a laptop computer. She's essentially buying the child's affection while undermining the parents' authority." I watched Emma sitting quietly beside me, her small hands folded in her lap. She'd insisted on wearing her best dress, the blue one Marcus had bought her for her last birthday. She wanted to look respectful for the judge, she'd said. Richard stood to present our case, and his approach was methodical, almost surgical. He started with the financial records, showing the pattern of David's lies and manipulation. Then came the recordings Emma had made, played for the court in their damning entirety. Jennifer's voice filled the courtroom. "If Emma doesn't cooperate with our version of events, we'll pull her out of that school and homeschool her until she learns to respect family loyalty." David's voice followed. "Mom's always been emotional. If we push the right buttons, make her seem unstable, we can get the will overturned and the custody thing will sort itself out." I watched David's face as his own words played back to him. He looked like he wanted to disappear, to sink through the floor and never come back. Jennifer kept her expression neutral, but her lawyer looked increasingly uncomfortable. But the most powerful moment came when the judge asked to speak with Emma privately. I watched my granddaughter walk to the judge's chambers, her chin up, carrying herself with a dignity that reminded me so much of Marcus it made my chest ache. 20 minutes later, she emerged and took her seat beside me without saying a word. But she reached over and squeezed my hand, and I knew. The judge's decision was swift and final. Temporary custody to me, with supervised visitation for David and Jennifer. The court found evidence of emotional manipulation and financial instability in their household, as well as attempts to use the child as a pawn in adult conflicts. Furthermore, Judge Martinez said, looking directly at David and Jennifer, any future attempts to challenge Mrs. Collins's will or mental capacity will be viewed in light of today's evidence. This court does not look favorably on adults who exploit children to achieve financial gain. David started to say something, but Jennifer grabbed his arm and pulled him toward the exit. They left without looking back, without trying to speak to Emma, without showing any concern for how their daughter might feel about the decision. Emma and I drove home in comfortable silence. As we pulled into the driveway, she said quietly, "Do you think Dad will ever understand why I chose you?" I considered this carefully, the way you have to when a child asks you a real question that deserves a real answer. "I think your father is very confused right now about what love means," I said. "Maybe someday he'll figure it out. But that's not your job, sweetheart. Your job is just to be a kid and let people who really love you take care of you." That evening, we sat in Marcus's garden and I told Emma stories about her grandfather. Real stories, not the sanitized versions adults usually tell children. I told her about his stubbornness and his generosity, about how he'd worked extra shifts to pay for David's college even when his back ached every morning. I told her about the letter he'd written but never sent, about how much he'd loved David even when David disappointed him. "People are complicated," Emma said, pulling petals off a rose and arranging them in patterns on the bench between us. "Yes, they are. But some people choose to be good even when it's hard, and some people choose to be bad even when it's easy." I looked at this 8-year-old girl who'd somehow learned wisdom that had taken me 63 years to understand. "Where did you learn that?" "From watching everyone," she said simply. "From watching you and Grandpa Marcus choose to be good even when Dad and Mom made it hard." Over the next few months, we settled into a routine that felt surprisingly natural. Emma threw herself into school with the enthusiasm of a kid who finally felt secure at home. I threw myself into being a guardian, remembering skills I'd thought I'd forgotten, helping with homework, attending parent-teacher conferences, negotiating bedtimes and weekend activities. David called occasionally, awkward conversations where he asked about Emma's grades and activities like he was checking boxes on a list. Jennifer never called at all. They showed up for their court-mandated visits every other Saturday, sitting stiffly in my living room while Emma showed them her artwork or told them about school. The visits felt like performances where everyone was reciting lines they'd memorized but didn't believe in. I could see Emma trying to bridge the gap, working to make these visits comfortable for everyone. But I could also see her relief when they ended, the way her shoulders relaxed when David and Jennifer drove away. "It's okay to love them and be disappointed in them at the same time," I told her one Saturday after a particularly tense visit. "You don't have to choose between loving your parents and protecting yourself." "Is that what you do? Love Dad even though you're disappointed?" I thought about this while she waited for my answer. "I love who your father used to be, and I hope he'll find his way back to being that person someday. But I can't let that hope hurt you or me anymore." Spring came early that year, and with it came Emma's 9th birthday. She wanted a small party, just her school friends and me, cake in the garden surrounded by Marcus's roses. I watched her laugh with her friends, confident and happy in a way I hadn't seen since she was very small, and I felt Marcus's presence so strongly it was like he was standing beside me. That evening, after her friends had gone home and Emma was in bed, I sat in the garden with a glass of wine and called out to the darkness. "We did it, Marcus. She's going to be okay." A month later, Richard called with news I'd been expecting but still dreaded. "David and Jennifer are divorcing," he said. "Jennifer filed papers yesterday. She's asking for spousal support and half of their assets, which aren't substantial. She's also requesting that any future inheritance from you be considered marital property subject to division." Can she do that? She can try, but it won't work. The trust is ironclad, and Emma's inheritance is protected regardless of what happens between her parents. Richard paused. "There's more, Sarah. David called me this morning. He wants to meet with you." "About what?" He wouldn't say over the phone. But he sounded different. Tired, maybe. Or defeated. David showed up at my door the following Saturday, alone for the first time since Marcus's funeral. He looked older, thinner, like the stress of the past year had carved years off his life. But there was something else different about him. A stillness that reminded me of the boy he'd been before life, and Jennifer had complicated everything. "Mom," he said, standing awkwardly on the porch. "Can we talk?" I let him in, offered him coffee, and waited for him to find his words. We sat in the living room where we'd had so many difficult conversations, but this time felt different. Quieter. More honest. "Jennifer's gone," he said finally. "She moved out last week, took half of everything and filed for divorce. She says she can't be married to someone whose family cuts him off financially." I nodded but didn't say anything. This wasn't my tragedy to comment on. "I know you probably think I deserve this. And maybe I do." He stared at his hands, the way he used to when he was little and had to confess to breaking something. "I've been thinking a lot about Dad lately. About that letter you showed me." "What about it?" He was right. About everything. I did lie to him. And I did take advantage of his generosity. And the worst part is, I knew I was doing it. I just told myself it was okay because family should help each other, you know? But that wasn't really what I believed. I just wanted the money. I waited for him to continue, recognizing this as the most honest conversation we'd had in years. "I've been going to therapy," he said. "Court-ordered at first, because of the custody thing. But I kept going after because I needed to understand how I became someone who would miss his father's funeral for a birthday party." He looked up at me for the first time since he'd started talking. "I missed his funeral, Mom. I can't ever fix that." "No, you can't." "And I lost Emma because I was so focused on money that I forgot she was more important than anything I might inherit." His voice cracked slightly. "She barely talks to me during visits. She's polite, but it's like she's talking to a stranger. Emma loves you, David. But she's learned not to trust you. Trust has to be earned back." "I know. That's why I'm here." He reached into his jacket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. "I wrote something. For Emma. For when she's older and can understand everything that happened." He handed me the letter, and I read it while he waited. It was an apology, not the manipulative kind designed to get something in return, but the real kind that accepts responsibility without expecting forgiveness. He wrote about his mistakes, about how he'd let money and Jennifer's influence corrupt his relationship with his family. He wrote about Marcus, about the father he'd failed to honor, about the example he should have followed. But mostly, he wrote about Emma, about how proud he was of her courage, her honesty, her choice to protect herself and me when the adults in her life had failed her. He told her he understood why she'd chosen to live with me, and that he hoped someday he could become the kind of father she deserved. "This is honest," I said, folding the letter carefully. "I'll make sure she gets it when she's ready." "Thank you." He stood to leave, then turned back. "Mom, I know I don't have any right to ask this, but would it be okay if I kept coming to visit? Not for the court-mandated thing, but just to try to be part of Emma's life again?" even if it takes years. I thought about Marcus, about second chances and unconditional love, and the difference between enabling someone and giving them room to grow. You can visit, David. But you have to earn your place here. Emma sets the boundaries, not you. And if you hurt her again, or try to manipulate her, or use her to get to me or the inheritance, you'll be done. Permanently. I understand. After he left, I found Emma in the garden, reading under Marcus's favorite oak tree. Was that Dad? She asked without looking up from her book. Yes. Is he okay? I think he's trying to be. She marked her place in the book and looked at me seriously. Do you think people can really change? Some people can. But only if they want to badly enough, and only if they're willing to do the hard work. I sat down beside her on the old quilt we'd spread under the tree. What do you think? I think Dad might want to change, but I'm not ready to trust him yet. Is that okay? That's very okay. Trust is something you give when you're ready, not when someone else thinks you should be. Emma nodded and went back to her book, and I sat there watching her read in the dappled sunlight, thinking about families and forgiveness and the long road between making mistakes and earning redemption. 6 months later, on a warm Sunday in September, Emma turned 10. This time she wanted a bigger party. School friends, neighbors, even her father if he wanted to come. David showed up with a small gift and stayed in the background, helping serve cake and clean up afterward without being asked. When the party was over and the last guest had gone home, the three of us sat in the garden as the sun set behind Marcus's roses. Emma opened David's gift, a photo album filled with pictures of her and Marcus, carefully organized and labeled with stories about each moment. I found these in my old boxes, David said quietly. I thought you should have them. Emma studied each picture carefully, asking questions about the stories behind them. David answered patiently, sharing memories of his father with a gentleness I hadn't seen in years. When Emma went inside to get ready for bed, David and I stayed in the garden, comfortable in a silence that felt peaceful rather than tense. Thank you, he said finally, for not giving up on the idea that I might figure this out eventually. Don't thank me yet, I said. Thank me in another 10 years if you're still showing up. But watching him with Emma that day, seeing the careful way he followed her lead and respected her boundaries, I felt something I hadn't felt about my son in a very long time. Hope. Emma came downstairs in her pajamas to say goodnight, hugging me first and then, after a moment's hesitation, hugging David too. It was brief, careful, but it was real. After David left, Emma and I sat on her bed while I tucked her in. Do you think Grandpa Marcus would be proud of us? She asked. I looked around her room, the walls covered with her artwork, the bookshelf full of stories, the framed photo of Marcus teaching her to plant seeds in the garden. I think he'd be proud of you for being brave enough to choose love over fear, I said. And I think he'd be proud of me for learning the difference between protecting someone and enabling them. What about Dad? I think Grandpa Marcus would be proud that your father is trying to earn his way back to being worthy of you. Emma considered this, then smiled sleepily. I love you, Grandma Sarah. I love you too, sweetheart. More than you'll ever know. I turned off her light and walked downstairs to clean up the last of the party dishes. But first, I stopped at Marcus's photo on the mantel and touched the frame gently. She's going to be amazing, I whispered. Better than either of us ever dreamed. And in the quiet house, surrounded by the evidence of a life rebuilt on truth and love rather than obligation and manipulation, I finally felt like Marcus and I had given Emma something worth inheriting. Not just money or property, but the knowledge that she was worthy of genuine love, that she had the strength to demand honesty from the people in her life, and that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is refuse to enable someone's worst impulses. It had taken a funeral, a lawsuit, a custody battle, and the near destruction of our family to get here. But we had made it. Emma was safe, David was trying to heal, and Marcus's legacy lived on in the values we'd finally learned to protect. That night, I slept peacefully for the first time since my husband died, knowing that sometimes the most important inheritance isn't what you leave behind. It's what you refuse to let continue.